Hannah Cox. I'm Managing Director of Client Partnerships at Gallup Executive. So we are an executive search firm operating across digital operations and marketing. It's a pleasure today to welcome Ian Golding. Ian, could you do a brief introduction?
I can, Hannah. Hi, everyone. My name's Ian Golding. I am a global customer experience specialist. I essentially like preaching about what I call the science of customer experience all around the world, spending roughly half of my time sharing knowledge in the subject and the other half of my time helping organizations understand how to operationalize that knowledge. And as of last week, I have now worked in 64 countries over my 30 plus year career. So that's probably enough of an insight to me, Hannah.
Wonderful. Yeah, this podcast is titled CX is Dead. I guess we wanted to make it kind of a bit kind of controversial and, you know, a bit of a sharp kind of headline. Yeah, over to you, really. CX is dead, Ian. What do you think?
So the fascinating thing, and listening to you talking about all of that, is that I'm sitting here smiling about all of it, especially the way you and that CEO describe it. And we're having this conversation on the 3rd of December. And it is usually the beginning of December every year that I get a barrage of people coming to me saying two things. One, has customer experience come to an end and what's next? And what does the future look like? So now I've been operating independently since 2012, and I've probably been asked those two questions every year since about 2016. So there has always been a trend of people saying to me, that's the end of customer experience, what comes next? And I think I've responded in almost an identical way since 2016 by saying that customer experience will never die. And actually what's next is what we've just come from, in a way, because what we need to do is no different now to the position we were in 2016. That being said, the world is changing so quickly, arguably, we need to grow up much quicker. Now, what I mean, and I'm using the analogy of growing up, because coming back to what you said about your conversation with the CEO, the analogy really with customer experience is a little bit like having a child, in a way, because firstly, you conceive, as we know, which we won't go into any detail. Then there's the whole gestation period. Then you give birth, and then your baby grows up over a long period of time. Now, what most organizations now realize is that the baby has been born. This is a terrible analogy, but it's quite funny. But the baby has been born. And in fact, every organization has always had a customer experience. Whether they recognize it or not, whether they understand it or not, they always have done. But what most organizations haven't necessarily understood is how do they look at the experience that they created, okay, because they did create it, as parents do with their children, we create them, but how do they then nurture that experience so over time it grows up, becomes more mature, becomes more effective at what it needs to do, to the point that actually it is delivering for anyone that it interacts with. In an organizational sense, that means its shareholders, its parents, but also its colleagues, its brothers and sisters, and also its customers, its wider network of people that it interacts with. Now, the challenge that we have faced for many, many years is that whilst we know we have children, what we haven't necessarily recognized is how do we need to educate our children? How do we need to educate the organization so it understands how to increase maturity? Now, as we know, children go to school, and some children go to better schools than others. Some children learn better than others. This is why, in an organizational sense, some organizations are more successful than others, depending on how mature they are, how the skill set they adopt, the amount of effort and energy they put into developing their products, services, and evolving the whole experience. And this might sound like a terrible analogy, but actually this is exactly what we need to think about with customer experience. It's always been there, but how much have we invested in understanding what it looks like and understanding the skills, capabilities, and competencies required to make that experience as good as it can possibly be, so it delivers the best possible return for its parents, its shareholders, its colleagues, and its customers. Now, Hannah, that I describe customer experience as a science. Now, many people would never necessarily have considered it that way. Just because I describe it as a science, that doesn't mean it's rocket science. It's not complicated. Now, many like to massively overcomplicate it, but it is not complicated. And the thing is, do organizations know what the science of customer experience is? Now, the answer to that question is there are many who don't. And as a result, whilst they acknowledge that they have an experience in the main, they don't necessarily have an understanding of what's required to make that experience ever better able at meeting the needs and expectations of their customers. So the reason why we get to a position where people think that, well, this customer experience thing's a waste of time, we don't need to map journeys or do any of that, it doesn't do anything for us, is largely because either organizations don't really understand what to do with things like journey mapping because they've never had any formal education in it. So they hear about it, but don't really understand it. And so think, well, this is not necessary for us. Or organizations have been trying to adopt competencies and capabilities related to customer experience, but without good education and guidance, are adopting these things badly. And as a result, because they're adopting these things badly, they can't see what the impact is. They can't actually understand anything measurable. And as a result, they come to the conclusion, well, this thing doesn't work. And that's why, in unfortunately far too many cases, the sustained focus on customer experience doesn't happen and it just disappears. And so this is a very, very long-winded answer to your question, but do I think that customer experience is dead? Absolutely not. It has never died and it will never die. Is there a need for organizations to actually refocus on what it truly is? 100%. Because can most organizations in the UK and beyond, hand on heart, say that they manage the customer experience effectively? Well, a lot might say yes, but I beg to differ, because I'm in a very unusual position of seeing lots of things around the world. Most are doing it incredibly badly. And any organization that obsesses about its net promoter score, for example, are likely to be just one of those organizations. So no, it's not dead. It is very much alive, but is there a need for it to mature? 100%.
I love that. So CX isn't dead. In actual fact, it's only just been born.
In a way you could argue that, yes.
So, and CX often seen as kind of a colouring in department, and a lot of the stuff that you've just said there is all well, true, and valid, but you've highlighted a really great point that most businesses are not doing customer experience very well. So what's the point? What's the actual benefit in investing in customer experience?
And there isn't. If you don't know what you're doing, and if you are investing in things because you think you have to, but you don't know why you're doing it, then don't waste your time. Don't waste your time and money. You know, if someone comes to me and says, I need this, but I then say to them, why do you need it? Yeah, it's a really basic question, but you'll have the same thing. I need someone that can do this. Okay, why? Well, because we need one. What? No, that why? Well, because everyone, no, why? You know, it sounds like a very stupid thing, and I'm being, again, slightly antagonistic, but, you know, people don't know why. You know, people want to map journeys. Why do you want to map the customer journey? Well, because we have to. No, you don't. You don't have to. But what do you want to do with it? You know, I think we need to almost stop, just stop for a second and reflect on strategically what our organization's trying to do. Now, most organizations in the world probably are looking for sustainable growth. You know, that's what businesses typically are looking for. In the public sector, typically they're looking for greater efficiency and effectiveness in the way that they work and the way they operate, so they can do what they do better at a lower cost. You know, if we're clear about what is it that we're actually trying to do as an organization, we can then understand whether or not a customer-led approach is the right thing to help us achieve that goal. But because this is going to sound like I'm contradicting myself, no one has to focus on customer experience. You know, it's not essential. There's no law that says you have to. You can quite frankly have a strategy that is entirely focused on selling, even if that's to the detriment of your customer. If that's what you want to do, because that's what you think is the right thing to give your shareholder the return they need, do it. You don't have to be customer centric. You don't have to worry about the customer experience. But there is so much publicly available evidence from all around the world that says that if you are able to balance the need of the organization with the need of the customer, if you are able to switch from being product and sales led to customer led, you are likely to be far more capable of delivering sustainable growth in the long term. The difficulty, coming back to why do many think that it doesn't work, is that it's not easy to do. It takes a long time. It is a long-term strategy. And I think the greatest challenge in moving into 2026 is, whilst what I'm talking about is a long-term strategy, 99% of organizations in the world are not thinking long-term. You know, we live in a world now where very few think long-term. Most are thinking very short-term. Short-term financial return. Customer experience does not do that. You know, that as a discipline, as a methodology, you're not going to see the return instantly. It's all about developing better, stronger, deeper relationships over time, not giving you an immediate financial windfall. And so, you know, I think most need to ask themselves, what is it that we want? Do we want that immediate windfall? In which case, don't worry about your customers or colleagues. You know, just do whatever you need to do. But if you want your organization to be here, successfully operating in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, potentially 20%, 40%, 60% bigger than it is today, short-term reactive decisions are not going to enable that to happen.
I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, there are two very well publicised real-life examples of this from Ryanair, of course, who got very, very arrogant about the fact that they were not customer-focused in any way, shape or form. It was all about cost. And then there was a U-turn in that, and that they had to become more customer-focused than what they were, because they were getting such bad press and bad customer feedback that the business, it couldn't grow, and in fact it was hemorrhaging the customer base at quite an alarming rate. And then of course more recently there's the whole Klarna situation. Now dare I drop the terminology AI into the conversation, but you know, it is directly related to the customer experience. And so
Absolutely.
Klarna obviously very publicly said, oh, you know, we will wipe out the majority of our FTE base because we don't need them. It's all about AI. And then again, you know, was it 12 months later, very short space of time afterwards, it's like, okay, we've made a mistake, and you know, we do need to be more employee focused, which then of course means that a business is more customer focused. So that there is always, I believe, a need to invest in people, whether that be you know, customers or employees. But you know, we can't move away from the fact that the last 5 years, you know, the world has changed in such dramatic
100%.
ways. And so in a world where now change really is, and significant change really is the only constant, how can businesses think longer term when it's all about the shorter term? And what
It's
are
a
your thoughts around that?
great question. So firstly, let me just address the AI question or point. I had a brilliant conversation with someone earlier. I'm going to publish that conversation actually. So look out for that because you'll like that conversation. But and I asked this lady who she's the managing director of a. I would say historically I would have called it contact center technology, but she now calls it customer experience technology. And you know, I asked her, is AI getting rid of bums on seats? And you know, her response is that absolutely not. You know, what AI should be doing is empowering contact center agents, people that work in the field of customer service, to be better able to serve the customer. So it's not about removing people, it's about enabling your people to be more productive. So actually what you don't need to do is to recruit as many people going forward, because your brilliant resources with AI are now able to look at everything through one pane of glass, was her way of describing it. You know, AI is not a human replacement engine. You know, can it be used to eliminate unnecessary things that humans shouldn't have to do? Yes, absolutely. But you know, ultimately, we've got to remember, and you've heard me say this before, experiences are about human to human interaction. You can't get rid of all of that. Technology should be about better enabling that interaction, and that's what AI gives us the power to do. So the second part of your question, or your main question, the way I would best describe it, and actually coming back to the conversation you had with the CEO, this is why any leader that says to me they don't need to worry about the customer journey, we don't do that, you know, that I would get them to just pause for a second and think about what I'm going to say, because the customer journey is not a buzzword. Every organization has a customer journey. It represents everything that customers directly interact with. And every organization that exists right now already has one, even if they don't know it. And that journey is known as the current state journey. Okay. Now, in every current state journey, every interactions that your customers are having, there is no organization on earth that could tell me that the journey is perfect. Okay. If there is any organization on earth that tells me their journey is perfect, they're lying. There will always be things going wrong in that current state journey, going wrong that make life difficult for the customer and that make life difficult for their colleagues in delivering the experience to them. Now, there is another version of the journey that is the future state journey. The future state journey is a visualization of the journey in its perfect state, in its perfect form. If an organization could deliver the perfect journey, money was no object, it had all of the resources available to it, what would perfection be? Now, this is actually a thing. The difference between the current state journey and the future state journey is known as the customer experience gap. And what organizations should have a sense of is, what does that gap look like? And what should they be focusing on that will have the greatest impact in closing that gap? Now, the reason this is important is because the current state journey, if you do nothing, stays where it is. The future state journey is constantly changing. To your point, we are living in a world now where change is happening quicker than ever before. It won't slow down. It is only going to get quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker. And what that means is that the future state journey is getting further and further away from the current state. As technology changes, as customer behavior changes, as demographics change, and the bigger that customer experience gap becomes, the harder it becomes to close it. And the issue here is that if that gap gets too big and too difficult to close, it's at that point that organizations run the risk of becoming irrelevant. Because you suddenly realize that your current state is so far away from what that future should be that you are not going to be able to close the gap. And that's when organizations, unfortunately, suddenly realize they have a burning platform. And it becomes very, very difficult to put the fire out. So, ultimately, I urge anyone that listens to this, don't poo-poo things like journey mapping if you haven't, your organization hasn't had formal education in understanding what it is and how it should be used effectively. That this is the key. Many of these tools have been abused and misrepresented over the years. Don't judge based on organizations that have done this badly. We can have a very similar conversation, as I intimated before, about measurement, especially things like Net Promoter Score. Okay, most organizations have done it incorrectly. They're doing it badly, and they know they're doing it badly, but they don't care. So if you're watching this and think, oh, okay, this is a bit scary, okay, that's when you need to reach out and have a conversation with someone that can explain to you how you should be applying these things correctly.
It's interesting, and again, AI, because AI is interesting because it will incorporate such a large part of the customer journey in the future world.
Yes.
I mean, how we interact as people with the world in general is about to change significantly. But again, it's about, why do we need AI rather than just the shiny toy on the shelf and trying to bolt it on, and being serious about the outcomes and the purpose. So yeah, I mean, it's I just wondered, so I mean, so a lot of businesses are not doing customer experience very well. I mean, do you have kind of a top level example of a business that you've worked with in the last 5 years that has kind of completely changed their focus over to being more customer driven, and the outcomes that they have seen as a result?
I've worked with so many organizations that there are some very good examples of transformation. But actually, rather than me commenting on organizations that I've worked with specifically, you and I are quite involved in awards. In fact, you have your judging award behind you. One of the reasons that I am so supportive of the work Awards International do, the organization that produces these awards around the world, is because to win a customer experience award, you have to demonstrate what you've done and the impact that you've delivered as a result. So these awards are not given to people. These awards are earned because a judging panel have to determine, have you actually delivered a measurable impact? There are so many case studies that have come out of those awards over the last 15 years that just further prove what the impact of this is. But I think one of I'll give two examples from my time of I've been involved in the awards for the whole 15 years, but there are two particular examples that stand out to me that are just coincidentally both in the utilities sector. which the reason I want to mention these two organisations is because in the UK and beyond, the utilities sector is often cited as one of the very worst when it comes to delivering customer experiences. But this proves that actually it doesn't have to be that way. Historically, one of the best examples of customer experience transformation I've seen was Scottish Water. Now, Scottish Water is, for those who are not from the UK or not from Scotland, actually, because even people in England won't know, it is an organisation that if you live in Scotland, you have no choice but to use them, because that is the only way you can get water. You don't even see a bill because it's incorporated into taxation. They spent 12 years transforming themselves to become a truly customer-led organisation. Now, it happened because they had a complete nutcase, and I mean that in a nice way, a lady called Fiona, who was so focused on getting them to change their mindset in an organisation where their customers were hostages. But she did it and she pushed it because she knew that being customer-led made financial sense. It allowed them to become a more efficient and effective organisation. But she also knew it was going to take time. And there will be people listening to this, watching this, think 12 years? Well, we can't wait 12 years. Well, it's a long-term strategy. And if you commit to it, the change can be remarkable. The other example is, in a way, even more impressive, and that's a company called Northern Gas Networks. Now, Northern Gas Networks are a B2B organisation. They dig holes to put pipes in the ground to get gas into homes and businesses in the north of England. Okay, that's what they do. Again, why on earth would they care about customer experience is what most people would ask me. Now, their CEO at the time, an incredibly impressive man called Mark Horsfield. He's probably retired now, I would imagine. I've never worked with them actually, but I had the pleasure of judging them at the awards. And I said to him, why? Why did you do this? And he said, well, because in all honesty, Ian, I just wanted to run a successful organisation, and being customer led and people led enabled me to run a successful organisation. And he told me a brilliant story of his time starting at this organisation, which was historically a public sector business that was then privatised. So very historic public sector mentality. He said that on day one, when he arrived at their head office in Leeds, he drove into the car park and there was only one parking space available. And that parking space was right next to the front door, and there was a plaque with his name on it. So he said he drove out of the car park and parked down the road. He then came back in, he walked back in, walked into reception and asked the receptionist for a screwdriver. And he took the plaque off the wall. He said he had to get rid of this sort of legacy, hierarchy, command and control culture. He replaced most of the leadership team. He wanted this to be a collaboration, not a military dictatorship, so to speak. And that the rest is history. Again, that they won in the teams, they won so many customer experience awards for the work they did. So just two examples. People spend too much time listening to people waffling on about Disney. That's not what people need to hear. They need to hear real stories of real organizations that have done remarkable things to change the mindset. I'm not saying Disney isn't real, by the way, that they are a wonderful organization, but most cannot relate directly to that.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, that we could go on, but honestly, I've got so much more to say, but I know that I'll talk too much at the best of times. I wanted to keep it to kind of 20, 30 minutes, but there's a load of really great stuff in there, Ian, and so some actionable bits, and certainly a lot of food in there for people's thoughts. So I feel a follow-up podcast with you is definitely on the cards.
Anytime.
And yeah, we'll leave it there. But thank you very much for joining me, Ian. And
always a pleasure.
All the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah.